It was a calm Tuesday afternoon in New York City, the kind of day where the sunlight hits the pavement just right, making the busy streets look a little bit like gold. Inside a quiet, upscale bistro in the heart of the city, the atmosphere was peaceful. This wasn't one of those loud, crowded tourist traps. It was a place where people went to think, to talk business, or just to enjoy a good meal without being bothered. The smell of fresh bread and expensive coffee filled the air, and the sound of soft jazz music played quietly in the background. The staff moved around the room like ghosts, silent and efficient, making sure every water glass was full without interrupting the guests. At a small corner table, right near the window, sat a man who looked very different from the usual crowd that frequented this place. He was wearing a simple, faded hoodie, a worn-out leather jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't have a big group of friends with him, and he certainly didn't have a team of bodyguards blocking the door. It was just him, sitting alone with a notebook and a cup of black coffee. It was Keanu Reeves. Even though he is one of the most famous actors in the world, known for huge action movies and a career that spans decades, he sat there with the energy of a regular person. He didn't demand attention. In fact, he seemed to be trying very hard to avoid it. When the waiter came over to refill his cup, Keanu looked up with a warm, genuine smile. He didn't just nod, he looked the waiter in the eye and said thank you, asking how his day was going. It was a small interaction, but it showed the kind of man he was: humble, kind, and grounded. He wasn't the rich and famous guy throwing his weight around, he was just a human being enjoying a moment of peace. However, that peace was about to be broken. The front door of the restaurant swung open with a loud bang that made the chimes crash against the glass. The soft jazz music was suddenly drowned out by the sound of loud laughter and shouting. The entire restaurant looked up from their plates to see who had entered. Walking in was a family that seemed to scream money from every pore. There was a father in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, a mother covered in expensive jewelry that clinked every time she moved, and their son, who looked to be in his early 20s. They didn't walk into the room, they marched in as if they owned the entire city block. The son was wearing designer clothes from head to toe, and he had a look on his face that was a mix of boredom and arrogance. He was scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to where he was walking, while his parents demanded the best table in the house. The host, a young man who was trying his best to be polite, explained that they were quite busy and that they might have to wait a few minutes or take a slightly smaller table near the back. The father didn't like that answer. He raised his voice, making a scene that caused the other diners to frown in their direction. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, using a phrase that is almost never followed by something good. He started waving his hands around, treating the host like he was nothing more than a piece of furniture. The mother chimed in, complaining about the temperature of the room and the music, making it very clear that they were used to getting exactly what they wanted, exactly when they wanted it. The son, finally looking up from his phone, smirked at his parents' behavior, seemingly enjoying the show and the power they held over the staff. Eventually, the host, not wanting to cause a bigger disturbance, sat them at a large table in the center of the room. From there, they could see everyone, and everyone was forced to look at them. They were loud. Their laughter was fake and piercing. They talked about their expensive vacations, the new cars they were buying, and the people they looked down upon. They created a cloud of negativity that spread through the restaurant, making the other guests uncomfortable. Waiters and waitresses tried to stay out of their way, knowing from experience that this type of customer was looking for any reason to complain. As the family settled in and started ordering appetizers that cost more than a week's worth of groceries, The young man's eyes began to wander around the room. He was looking for something to entertain him, something to break the boredom he felt. His gaze scanned over the businessmen on their laptops, the couples enjoying their dates, and finally, it landed on the corner booth. He squinted his eyes, looking at the man in the worn-out jacket and the baseball cap. For a second, he looked confused. Then, a look of recognition crossed his face. It was Keanu Reeves? The young man nudged his mother hard, whispering something in her ear while pointing an accusing finger toward the corner. The mother looked over, her eyes widening behind her designer sunglasses, and then she whispered to the father. The father turned his head, staring openly at the actor. A normal person might have been excited to see a movie star in real life. They might have waved or asked for a photo later. But this family didn't have that kind of respect. Instead of seeing a legend, they saw someone they could use. The young man, let's call him the rich kid, watched Keanu quietly sip his coffee. He saw Keanu's simple clothes and his solitary table. To a kid raised with endless money and very little heart, Keanu looked like an easy target. He didn't see the kindness in Keanu's eyes or the decades of hard work. He only saw a man sitting by himself who wasn't flashing his wealth. The rich kid turned back to his parents, and a wicked grin spread across his face. He started talking animatedly, making gestures that suggested he had a plan. The parents laughed, their eyes cold and cruel as they looked back at the unsuspecting actor. They weren't fans, they were bullies who had just found a new game to play. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted completely. The other guests sensed that something was about to happen. The staff looked nervous, glancing between the loud family in the center and the quiet man in the corner. Keanu, ever observant, seemed to feel the change in energy too. He didn't look up immediately, he stayed focused on his notebook, perhaps choosing to ignore the negative vibes that were drifting his way. But the rich kid wasn't going to let him ignore it for long. He was already waving his hand in the air, signaling for a waiter, ready to set his cruel plan into motion. The calm afternoon was over, and a storm was about to start right in the middle of lunch. The tension in the room was growing thicker by the minute, like a storm cloud that was slowly taking over the sky. The young man at the center table couldn't take his eyes off Keanu Reeves. It wasn't a look of admiration or respect that one might expect when seeing a Hollywood legend up close. Instead, it was a look of cruel amusement. He nudged his father again, pointing a finger rudely across the room, whispering something that made the older man chuckle darkly. They were treating a real human being, sitting just a few feet away, like a character in a game they were playing. The waiter, a hard-working young guy who was just trying to pay his bills, approached the table with a notepad in hand, ready to take their order. He could feel the negative energy radiating off the family, and his hands were slightly shaky as he stood next to them. The rich kid looked up at the waiter with a wide, fake smile. He didn't look at the menu, he already knew what he wanted to order, but his intention wasn't to satisfy his own hunger. His intention was to be mean. He ordered a large platter of the messiest appetizers on the menu, extra spicy buffalo wings, dripping in hot sauce, with a side of blue cheese that looked more like a gooey mess than food. He added a plate of loaded nachos with everything on it, the kind of food that gets everywhere when you try to eat it. The waiter wrote it down quickly, trying to get away from the table as fast as possible, but the rich kid stopped him before he could turn around. "Make sure they are extra sloppy," the kid laughed, looking back at his parents. "We want to enjoy the full experience." The food arrived just a few minutes later, carried by a different server who had to navigate carefully to avoid spilling it on the expensive suit the father was wearing. The smell of spicy chicken and cheese filled the air, but it wasn't an appetizing smell in that context, it smelled like trouble. The rich kid rubbed his hands together, but he didn't pick up a napkin. He didn't even look at the food with hunger. He grabbed a chicken wing by the bone, took one tiny bite out of it, chewed it loudly with his mouth open, and then spit the bone carelessly back onto the plate. Sauce splattered onto the white tablecloth, and the kid laughed as he wiped his greasy hands on the cloth, ruining it completely. He picked up a nacho, took a bite, and then tossed the rest of it back onto the pile. It was clear he wasn't interested in eating. He was preparing the food for something else. He looked at the waiter who had taken their order and waved him over again. The waiter hesitated, looking towards the kitchen as if he could find an escape route, but he knew he had to go. When he reached the table, the rich kid pointed his greasy finger directly at Keanu, who was still sitting quietly in the corner, completely unaware of the drama unfolding just a few tables away. "You see that guy over there?" the kid asked, his voice loud enough for people at the nearby tables to hear. "The one in the cheap clothes?" The waiter swallowed hard. He knew exactly who was sitting in the corner. Everyone in the restaurant knew by now, but they were respecting his privacy. "Yes, sir," the waiter said quietly, trying to be professional. "That is Mr. Reeves?" "I don't care who he is," the rich kid sneered, looking back at his half-eaten plate of food. "He looks like he's having a pretty lonely lunch. It looks like he's fallen on hard times or something, doesn't it?" He laughed, and his mother joined in, covering her mouth with a napkin to hide her grin. The father just nodded, enjoying his son's show of dominance. The kid pushed the plate of mangled, sauce-covered wings and half-eaten nachos toward the edge of the table. "Take this plate over to him. Tell him it's a gift from us." The waiter froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was one thing to be rude to staff, which happened all too often, but this was different. This was deliberately trying to humiliate another person, especially someone who was known for being kind and decent. "Sir," the waiter stammered, his face turning red with embarrassment. I don't think that is appropriate. He is a guest here, just like you. I cannot take leftover food to another table." The waiter's heart was pounding in his chest. He was terrified of losing his job, but his dignity wouldn't let him do it. The smile instantly vanished from the rich kid's face. He looked at the waiter with cold, angry eyes. He looked at his father for support. The father didn't say a word, he just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash. He peeled off $100 bill and held it up between his fingers, waving it slightly in the air. "Take the money," the father said, his voice low and dangerous. "Take the food. Do what my son asks. Or we can ask to speak to your manager and tell him how terrible the service is. You decide." The restaurant went quiet. People nearby stopped eating and watched the scene unfold. The pressure was immense. The waiter looked at the money, then at the food, and then over at Keanu. He felt trapped. If he refused, he might get fired, and he really needed this job, but if he did it, he would be part of something cruel. The rich kid leaned forward, enjoying the waiter's discomfort. "Maybe he's hungry," the kid said loudly, causing a few people to gasp. "Actors don't always work, you know. He probably can't afford the good stuff. Go on, be a hero. Give him our scraps." It was a disgusting display of arrogance. They were treating Keanu like a stray dog that needed to be fed scraps from the table. The waiter, feeling tears of frustration prick his eyes, finally nodded slowly. He took the $100 bill, not because he wanted the money, but because he felt he had no choice. He picked up the dirty plate, trying not to touch the mess where the kid had wiped his hands. He felt sick to his stomach. "I'm sorry," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He turned and began the long walk across the restaurant. Every step felt heavy, like he was walking through mud. He could feel the eyes of the rich family burning into his back, watching and waiting for their prank to land. He could feel the eyes of the other diners, some with looks of pity, others with looks of shock. As he got closer to the corner booth, he saw Keanu finally look up from his notebook. Keanu saw the waiter coming, but he didn't see the food immediately. He saw the waiter's face. He saw the distress, the embarrassment, and the fear. Keanu didn't look annoyed that his lunch was being interrupted. He looked concerned. He sat up straighter, his body language shifting from relaxed to attentive. The waiter stopped at the edge of the table, holding the plate of ruined food. He wanted to disappear. "Sir." "Mr. Reeves," the waiter started, his voice trembling so badly he almost couldn't speak. He looked back at the center table, where the rich kid was holding up his phone, clearly recording the whole thing to laugh about later with his friends. I am so sorry to bother you," the waiter continued, forcing the words out. The table over there." He couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't bring himself to say that they thought Keanu needed their leftovers. Keanu looked at the plate, then at the phone being pointed at them, and finally, his eyes landed back on the waiter's face. He understood immediately what was happening. He understood that this wasn't about the food, it was about power. The rich kid was trying to prove that he was better than everyone else, and he was using the waiter to do it. Keanu didn't get angry. He didn't look at the family and yell. Instead, he did something that completely surprised the waiter. He took a deep breath, softened his expression, and looked the waiter directly in the eyes with a look of pure understanding. He wasn't going to let the waiter take the fall for the rich kid's bad behavior. "Is that for me?" Keanu asked gently, his voice cutting through the tension like a warm knife through butter. The waiter nodded, feeling a single tear escape and roll down his cheek. The rich kid in the distance laughed louder, thinking he had won. But he had no idea who he was really dealing with. The waiter braced himself for Keanu to throw the plate or storm out, but Keanu just reached out his hands to take the mess. He was about to turn a moment of humiliation into a masterclass in dignity, and the whole restaurant was about to see it happen. The air in the restaurant seemed to stand completely still. It felt as if someone had pressed the pause button on life, and every single person in the room was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The young waiter stood frozen next to Keanu's table, his hand trembling as he held out the plate of ruined food. It was a humiliating sight: half-eaten chicken wings covered in spicy red sauce, nachos with cheese dripping off the sides, and the unmistakable mess of someone who had taken a bite and discarded the rest like garbage. The waiter's eyes were filled with shame. He felt like he was part of a cruel prank, and he hated himself for it. He just wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Keanu Reeves, however, didn't look at the food with disgust. He didn't look at the waiter with anger. He kept his eyes locked on the young man's face. He saw the panic there. He saw the fear of losing a job and the fear of the wealthy family watching from the other side of the room. Keanu knew exactly what was going on. He had been in this world long enough to understand power dynamics. He knew that the rich kid was trying to make a fool out of him, but he also knew that the waiter was just a pawn in their game. If Keanu reacted with anger, or if he refused the food and made a scene, the waiter would be the one to suffer. The family would complain, the manager would get involved, and the kid doing his job would likely get blamed. So, Keanu made a choice. It was a choice that showed more class than any expensive suit or fancy car ever could. He slowly reached out his hands and took the plate from the waiter. "Thank you," Keanu said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm and clear. He didn't say it sarcastically. He didn't roll his eyes. He said it with the same gratitude he would have shown if someone had brought him a fresh, hot meal straight from the kitchen. The waiter blinked, completely stunned. He had expected Keanu to be insulted. He had prepared himself for a shouting match. "Sir. They made me," the waiter whispered, leaning in slightly, desperate for Keanu to know he wasn't the enemy. "I am so sorry." Keanu gently placed the messy plate on the table in front of him, right next to his notebook. He looked up at the waiter and gave him a small, reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile that melts away tension. "Don't worry about it," Keanu said softly. "Please, go take care of yourself. You're doing a great job." The waiter felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't believe it. This famous actor, who had every right to be furious, was instead comforting him. The waiter nodded quickly, wiping his eye with the back of his hand. "Thank you," the waiter whispered, before turning and practically running back toward the kitchen, needing to escape the pressure of the moment. Keanu turned his attention to the plate of food. He picked up a napkin and looked over at the center table. The rich kid was still holding his phone up, recording everything. The family was leaning forward, waiting for Keanu to yell, to throw the food, or to storm out of the restaurant in a fit of rage. That was what they wanted. That was the entertainment they were looking for. They wanted to see the movie star have a meltdown so they could laugh about it later. But Keanu didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, he looked at the phone camera, and to everyone's shock, he raised the half-eaten chicken wing in a mock toast, like he was raising a glass of champagne. He gave a small nod to the camera, acknowledging them, but not in a way that showed anger. It was a look that said, "I see you, and I am unaffected by your cruelty." He took the wing, pretended to inspect it for a moment, and then placed it back down on the plate with care. The reaction from the family was instant. The rich kid lowered his phone, looking confused. His face scrunched up as he tried to figure out what just happened. He didn't get the angry reaction he wanted. The father stopped laughing and looked at Keanu with a strange expression, part annoyance and part disbelief. The mother whispered something to her husband, looking uneasy. It is a very uncomfortable feeling when you try to hurt someone, and they refuse to be hurt. It makes the person doing the hurting look small and petty. Keanu had turned the mirror back on them, and suddenly, they didn't look like powerful players, they looked like bullies who had failed. The rest of the restaurant was buzzing with whispers. People at nearby tables had seen the whole thing. They saw the arrogance of the rich family, they saw the waiter's distress, and they saw how Keanu handled it with such grace. A couple at the table nearest to Keanu clapped their hands softly, a sign of respect. Others nodded in approval. The vibe in the room had completely shifted. The fear that the family had instilled in everyone was gone, replaced by a collective respect for the man in the corner booth. Keanu, however, didn't let the applause go to his head. He simply moved the plate of food to the side to clear some space. He wasn't going to eat it. Nobody would expect him to eat food that had been manhandled by a stranger, but he kept it on the table as a symbol. He picked up his coffee cup, took a sip, and looked back down at his notebook. He picked up his pen and started writing again, completely blocking out the negativity. He was back in his own world, peaceful and focused. A few minutes later, the waiter came back. He looked much calmer now. He had a fresh cup of coffee in his hand, and he walked over to Keanu's table with a new sense of confidence. "I wanted to bring you a fresh cup," the waiter said, placing it gently on the table. "On the house." Keanu looked up and smiled again. "You didn't have to do that, but thank you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He took out a few bills and placed them on the table for the tip. It was a generous amount, far more than the cost of the coffee. He looked the waiter in the eye. "And listen to me. Don't let those people get to you. You're a good person. Keep your head up." The waiter looked at the money, then at Keanu. He felt a surge of gratitude. "You have no idea how much that means to me," the waiter said sincerely. "I was so scared I was going to lose my job." "Your job is safe," Keanu said reassuringly. "Just keep being you." The waiter nodded and walked away, standing a little taller than he had before. He felt like he had just survived a battle, and a general had fought it for him. Back at the center table, the rich kid was getting agitated. He poked at his own food, angry that his prank had failed. He kept looking over at Keanu, trying to catch his eye again, trying to provoke him. "Why is he acting like that?" the kid complained to his parents, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "I gave him food. He should be thanking me properly. He's weird." "Maybe he's just shy, honey," the mother said, though she didn't sound convinced. She took a sip of her wine and looked around the restaurant, noticing that people were staring at them now, but not with envy. They were staring with judgment. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was used to being admired, but this feeling was foreign and unpleasant. She adjusted her expensive jewelry, suddenly feeling like it was weighing her down. The father, sensing that the mood had soured, tried to regain control. He waved his hand at the waiter who had just served Keanu. "Hey! We need more water over here," he shouted, snapping his fingers. The waiter hurried over, but his demeanor was different now. He didn't look scared. He looked professional. He filled the water glasses efficiently without saying a word, treating them with cold politeness rather than submissive fear. The family felt the change. They realized that the power they thought they had was an illusion. They could buy expensive things, and they could be rude to people, but they couldn't buy respect. And they certainly couldn't mess with a man who had earned the love of the entire world through decades of kindness without facing the consequences. The rich kid sulked in his seat, scrolling through his phone again, but the fun was gone. The joke had backfired completely. Keanu sat quietly in the corner, unaware or perhaps just uncaring about the drama he had just neutralized. He finished his coffee, closed his notebook, and leaned back, watching the city through the window. He had taken a moment of disrespect and turned it into a moment of dignity. He had protected a stranger from humiliation and taught a master class on how to be a human being, all without raising his voice. The restaurant was peaceful again, but the storm was far from over. The owner of the restaurant had just walked out of the kitchen, and he had seen everything. He was not a man who tolerated bullies in his establishment, and he was heading straight for the center table. The heavy double doors that led to the kitchen swung open with a sudden force that cut through the quiet murmuring of the dining room. A man stepped out, wiping his hands on a white cloth tucked into his waistband. This was the owner of the restaurant. He was a man who had built this place from nothing, working his way up from washing dishes to owning one of the most respected spots in the city. He took great pride in his establishment, not just because of the food, but because of the atmosphere. He believed the restaurant should be a place of respect and comfort, a sanctuary from the noise of the world outside. He had been watching from the small round window in the kitchen door. He saw the waiter's distress, he saw the plate of messy food being sent to Keanu's table, and most importantly, he saw how Keanu handled it. He saw the rich kid's phone recording the event, and he heard the laughter that followed. His blood was boiling, but he kept his face calm and hard. He wasn't going to scream. He didn't need to. True authority doesn't need to yell. He walked across the room with a purpose, his shoes clicking sharply against the wooden floor. The first person he passed was Keanu's table. The owner didn't stop to chat, but he slowed down for a split second. He and Keanu exchanged a look, a silent nod of mutual respect. Keanu offered a small, appreciative smile, knowing that the help was on the way for the staff who had been mistreated. The owner didn't stop there. He continued his march directly toward the large table in the center of the room. The family was still distracted. The rich kid was busy showing his mother a video on his phone, giggling like a toddler, while the father was loudly complaining about the temperature of the water. They didn't notice the shadow falling over their table until the owner was standing right next to them, blocking the light from the overhead lamp. "Is there a problem with the water, sir?" the owner asked. His voice was deep and steady, but there was an edge to it like a serrated knife. It wasn't a question that came from a desire to serve, it was a challenge. The father looked up, annoyed at being interrupted. He didn't see a restaurant owner, he saw just another employee he could push around. Finally, the father huffed, dropping his spoon into the glass with a loud clink. "Yes, there is a problem. This water isn't cold enough. And frankly, the service here has been terrible. My son was just trying to do something nice for one of your regulars, and your waiter acted like it was a chore. You need to train your staff better." The owner stared at the father for a long moment. He didn't write anything down. He didn't apologize. He just looked at them with eyes that were completely unimpressed by their expensive clothes or their arrogant attitude. "I saw exactly what your son did," the owner said, his voice dropping an octave so that only they could hear, yet the intensity of it carried across the table. "I saw him mock a paying customer. I saw him send a plate of garbage leftovers that he had his hands all over to another guest. And I saw you wave money at my staff to make them humiliate themselves." The rich kid stopped laughing and sat up straight. The mother put her phone down on the table. The color slowly drained from the father's face. For the first time since they walked in, they realized they weren't in control. The father tried to recover, puffing out his chest. "I don't know what you think you saw, but we are paying customers. We are spending a lot of money here. That man over there," he pointed a finger toward the corner, "is nobody compared to us. We were just having a laugh. Can't you take a joke?" The owner leaned down, placing his hands flat on the table. He got right into the father's face. "That man," the owner said, emphasizing every word, "is a gentleman. He has more class in his little finger than your entire family has in their bank accounts. He treats my staff with kindness. He treats this place with respect. You treat my restaurant like your personal trash can." The father's face turned a deep shade of red. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. It hit the floor with a loud crash that echoed through the silent restaurant. "Do you know who I am?" the father shouted, the composure finally cracking. "I could buy this place 5 times over. I could have you fired. I will make sure no one in the city ever hires you again." The owner didn't flinch. He actually smiled a cold, humorless smile. "You can't buy this place," the owner said simply. "And even if you could, you wouldn't know how to run it. You see, money doesn't buy you manners. It doesn't buy you decency. And it certainly doesn't buy you the right to bully people in my house. He pointed toward the door. I want you to leave. Now. The mother gasped, clutching her pearls. You are kicking us out, but we haven't even finished our appetizers. I don't care, the owner said, his voice rising just enough for the other diners to hear. You are not welcome here. Take your arrogance, take your money, and get out. Don't pay the bill. Just get out of my sight before I lose my temper completely. The rich kid stood up too, looking scared but trying to act tough. This is ridiculous, he muttered, looking around at the other tables, expecting someone to defend them. Dad, let's just go. This place is a dump anyway. It is not a dump. A voice shouted from across the room. It was an older woman who had been watching the whole time. You are the dump. Get out. Soon, other people started to join in. A man in a business suit stood up and glared at the family. A couple near the window clapped their hands. The rich family realized, with a sinking feeling in their stomachs, that the whole room was against them. They were surrounded by people who respected Keanu and who were tired of seeing bullies win. The father looked at the faces glaring at him. He looked at the security guards who were now slowly walking toward the table, their arms crossed, looking like they wouldn't mind grabbing the father by the collar and throwing him out onto the street. The arrogance vanished, replaced by pure humiliation. He knew he had lost. There was no amount of money he could throw at the situation to make him look good again. Fine, the father spat out, grabbing his jacket. We didn't want to eat here anyway. The food smells like grease. It was a weak insult, a last desperate attempt to save some dignity, but it landed flat. He turned to grab his wife, who was already scrambling to gather her purse, clutching it tightly to her chest like a shield. The rich kid, finally looking like the scared child he really was, looked over at Keanu one last time. He expected Keanu to be laughing at him. He expected Keanu to be pointing and cheering for his eviction. But Keanu wasn't doing any of that. Keanu was just watching him with a calm, sad look. It was a look that said, "You could have been better than this." That look hurt more than any shout ever could. The owner stepped aside to clear a path to the door. "Don't come back," he said as they walked past him. The father tried to shove past him, but the security guard stepped in, blocking his way and forcing him to walk around. The family walked the walk of shame through the center of the restaurant. They had to walk past every single table, past the whispers and the shaking heads, past the people who were judging them. It was the longest walk of their lives. As they reached the front door, the rich kid looked back one final time. He saw the waiter who he had tormented earlier standing near the kitchen, smiling with relief. He saw the owner standing tall and proud. And he saw Keanu, sitting peacefully in the corner, finally able to enjoy his coffee in peace. The realization hit the kid hard. They had the money to buy anything, but they didn't have what Keanu had. They didn't have respect. They didn't have friends. And they certainly didn't have class. The door opened, and they were thrust out onto the busy street, leaving the warmth and class of the restaurant behind them forever. The door swung shut, cutting off their presence, and the restaurant instantly felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had finally passed. The owner exhaled a long breath, straightened his apron, and turned to look at Keanu, giving him a thumbs up. The nightmare was over. As the heavy restaurant door clicked shut, cutting off the view of the street, the entire room seemed to let out a breath it had been holding for far too long. The tension that had choked the air evaporated almost instantly, leaving behind a feeling of lightness and relief. The silence that followed was not awkward or heavy, it was peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that falls over a place after a storm has passed and the sun finally comes out. Inside, the mood shifted from discomfort to joy. A few people at the tables near the windows began to clap their hands slowly. It wasn't a wild cheer, but a respectful applause. Others nodded their heads in approval, smiling at one another. It was a shared moment of victory for decency. The staff, who had been walking on eggshells for the last half hour, suddenly stood taller. The waiter who had been forced to deliver the cruel plate was wiping down a counter, but he was doing it with a huge grin on his face. He looked like a massive weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The owner of the restaurant stood near the center table, watching the door to make sure the family didn't try to come back in. Satisfied that they were gone, he smoothed down his apron and took a deep breath. He looked tired but happy. He turned his attention to the corner booth. He walked over, not with the hurried pace of a businessman, but with the steady gait of a friend. He stopped at Keanu's table, looking down with genuine warmth. Keanu was just closing his notebook. He looked up, his face calm and serene, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. He didn't look like a hero who had just saved the day, he looked like a man finishing his lunch. "I am so sorry about that," the owner said, his voice thick with emotion. He wanted to apologize on behalf of his city, on behalf of the human race, that someone had treated Keanu so poorly. "I should have kicked them out the moment they sat down. I shouldn't have let it get that far." Keanu waved his hand gently, dismissing the apology. "Please, don't worry about it," Keanu said softly. "You handled it perfectly. You stood up for your staff and for your place. That is rare. You have a great team here." The owner smiled, appreciating the kind words. "They are a good team. And you, well, you were incredible. I saw what you did. Taking the plate to save the waiter from trouble. I have seen a lot of things in this business, Mr. Reeves, but I have never seen that kind of class." "It was just a plate of food," Keanu replied modestly. "The kid was just looking for attention. If I had gotten mad, he would have won. This way, the waiter stayed safe, and nobody got hurt. It was a perfect lesson in emotional intelligence." Keanu understood that fighting fire with fire only burns everything down. By absorbing the insult and transforming it into a moment of protection, he had disarmed the bully without saying a cross word. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet to pay the bill. The owner immediately shook his head. "No, absolutely not. Lunch is on the house today. It's the least we can do." But Keanu insisted. He placed some cash on the table to cover the coffee and the sandwich, and then he added a very generous tip. He slid the money forward and stood up. "Please, take it," Keanu said, putting a hand on the owner's shoulder for a brief second. "Your servers work hard. They deserve it." Before he left, Keanu walked over to the side station where the young waiter was organizing silverware. The waiter looked up, surprised to see the actor standing in front of him. He straightened his back, looking nervous again. Keanu leaned in slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you for taking care of me today," he said. "You did a great job." The waiter beamed, his face lighting up. "Thank you, sir. I was so scared I was going to mess up." "You didn't mess up," Keanu said firmly. "You were in a tough spot, and you handled it with respect. Don't let people like that change who you are. You're a good man, and you're going to go far. Keep your head up, okay?" The waiter nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. He realized that the rich kid's opinion meant nothing, but the encouragement from Keanu meant everything. It was a moment the young man would remember for the rest of his life, not the day he was humiliated, but the day a movie star treated him like an equal. Keanu gave a small wave to the room, picked up his worn-out leather jacket, and headed for the door. He didn't ask for attention, but he received it anyway. Every person in the restaurant watched him go. There were no paparazzi flashing cameras, no screaming fans, just a room full of people silently acknowledging a true gentleman. As the door opened, the cool breeze from the street blew in, ruffling his hair. He stepped out onto the sidewalk and disappeared into the flow of the city, just another face in the crowd, leaving behind a trail of positivity. Outside, the scene on the street was very different. The rich family was standing on the corner, looking flustered and angry. The father was checking his watch aggressively, tapping his foot on the pavement as if he could force time to move faster with his anger. The mother was looking into the reflection of a shop window, fixing her hair, trying to regain her composure, but her face was flushed with embarrassment. Passers-by glanced at them, sensing their bad energy, and gave them a wide berth. The rich kid was scrolling through his phone, but he wasn't laughing anymore. He was watching the video he had recorded, but now it didn't look funny. Watching it back, without the adrenaline of the moment, he just looked like a bully. He looked cruel and small. He saw the way Keanu had nodded at the camera, not with anger, but with pity. That look of pity stung more than any insult. He looked up at his parents, expecting them to be angry, but they just looked defeated. "Let's just go," the father muttered when their car finally pulled up. "This place is a joke. I don't know why we bothered." As they climbed into their luxury car, slamming the doors shut, they tried to block out the world. They had the leather seats, the air conditioning, and the expensive technology, but the car felt cold. They drove away, leaving the restaurant behind, but they couldn't escape the feeling that they had lost something important that day. They had shown the world who they really were, and it wasn't a pretty picture. Money could buy them a getaway car, but it couldn't buy them the respect they had just thrown away. Back inside the bistro, the atmosphere remained warm and friendly. The staff went back to work with smiles on their faces. The customers enjoyed their meals, chatting happily. The story of what happened began to circulate, not as a scandal, but as a legend. People would talk about the day the rich family tried to humiliate Keanu Reeves and how he had defeated them with nothing but kindness. The owner walked back to the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, feeling proud of his restaurant and the people in it. He realized that while money could buy a table in his restaurant, it couldn't buy a seat at the table of humanity. That was something you had to earn through your actions, your respect for others, and your ability to stay kind even when the world is being cruel to you. Keanu Reeves had left, but his presence lingered in the best way possible. He had turned a lunch hour into a life lesson. He showed everyone that true power isn't about how loud you can shout or how much money you can throw around. True power is about staying calm, protecting those who are vulnerable, and treating every single person you meet with dignity, no matter who they are or what they have done. It was a simple lesson, taught by a simple man, and it was a story that the people in that restaurant would tell forever. The rich family had the money, but Keanu had the class, and in the end, that is what truly matters.